Masih menyaksikan Mining Zone CNBC Indonesia bersama saya Safrina Nasution dan kami masih berdiskusi dengan Chief Financial Officer of Bayan Resources, Alastair McLeod. How are you, Mr. Alastair?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for still being here with us.
No problem.
Moving on. In terms of the coal prices, we see that the coal prices level has been plummeted if it compared to what we have last year, the anomaly prices. And also we have some various negative sentiments in coal prices, such as climate change and so on. How do you see this will affect the performance of Bayan in the second semester of 2023?
Okay, the second semester will be, I think, slightly more challenging. The coal prices have dropped through the first semester and they're currently at the lowest they've been this year. That will impact profitability slightly and lower the margins we're able to achieve. Although at that level, at current levels, we're still generating a healthy margin. So as I said before, it won't really change this year's targets and objectives, and it won't change our long-term strategy of expanding production.
So still ongoing.
Correct.
And still optimistic for the second half of 2023.
Yes, to 2023, even with the drop in coal prices, it's going to be a very strong year for Bayan Resources, and we're going to be generating one of the industry-leading margins.
Now, because you mentioned about the healthy margin, sir, how much is the healthy margin that Bayan considered, and especially how do you see it as the forecast of coal prices long term, probably until the end of 2023 and probably next year in 2024?
Okay, currently, at least for 2023, I'm slightly more confident that coal prices will remain reasonably strong.
Reasonably strong.
So the current level of $130 to $140 for Newcastle, I think that's a good level. People can make healthy margins and continue to invest in production. Dropping lower than that, I think, will cause problems for a number of producers. Not for ourselves. We're rated one of the lowest cost producers, so we will be fine, but I think it will cause some problems for other producers in Indonesia. Longer term, I've given up looking at my crystal ball. I've been in the coal industry now where I've seen coal prices at $25 and now $400.
$400.
So I can't accurately predict where 24 and 25 is going to go. We've seen the shortening of commodity cycles. We're on a downward trend. How long that downward trend lasts before it turns the corner and picks back up, I honestly, I don't really waste my time trying to consider that.
So you still consider it as a cycle, the commodity cycle?
Yes, absolutely. It's a much shorter cycle now, but it's definitely impacted by all of the various factors of investment, of GDP growth, of weather in the whole world. So yes, it's always a supply and demand cycle.
But in terms of what happened last year, the anomaly prices, and it reached the highest, skyrocketed to around 390 or 400.
Yeah.
There's something like that. It's going to happen in the future. As you said, you have been seeing it. It was in $25 US. It has been 400. What do you think about it?
Well, I hope I don't see anything like that again in the future, because that was caused primarily by the Ukraine incident. So I hope I don't see $400 again, despite the fact that it generates healthy margins for us. But I think previously Newcastle had been as high as $180, $190, and that would be a more typical peak of the commodity cycle.
Right. And now moving on to the demand. How is the actual demand for coal, both for export and also for domestic needs that you see in Bayan?
Look, I think coal is an integral part of power generation in Indonesia and in the world, especially in Asia, in the developing countries. So demand is still strong. Demand is still increasing. So
Both for exports and for both for
yes,
domestic.
both in the domestic market and in the export market. Part of the government's policy of promoting downstreaming of minerals requires more refineries, that requires more power, and a proportion of that is being generated by coal-fired power plants. So that policy in itself requires more energy. Obviously, the continued strong growth of Indonesia and its growth in GDP stimulates the middle classes, and that, and again, requires more energy. So there's growing demand domestically, and that's replicated in most of the Asian countries where we export our coal to.
So you mentioned Asian countries, especially for export of coals of Bayan. Regionally, how do you see the demand of each region? Which has the strongest demand for Bayan itself?
The country that has got the largest demand for our coal is the Philippines. It accounts for approximately 31% of our sales volumes, and it's continued to grow consistently. Every year there's increasing demand, and most years there's new power plants that are coming online. Obviously, two of the larger markets that impact the world's demand is China and India. Those two markets are also continuing to grow.
And overcoming the dynamics of, there's a normalization of coal prices, but you see there's quite a strong, still considerably strong demands of both exports and both domestic demands. How is Bayan's strategy on deciding efficiency measures or any kind of products innovation or business expansion going forward, sir?
Well, as mentioned previously, our long-term strategy is to expand production. We've been investing in infrastructure for about the last 3 years. That's due to be complete at the end of this year. That'll open up a new logistical chain, which has most likely another 30 to 40 million tons throughput capacity. So over 24 to 27, we will be trying to utilize that new logistical chain and further grow production. So this year we're most likely just going to be shy of about 50 million tons production, but that's not where we want to stop. We want to add another 30, 40 million tons to that over the next 5 years.
Now I need your opinion about other coal producers already innovating on how to downstream the coal minerals, such as turning it into dimethyl ethane and so on. How does Bayan generally see this?
We have reviewed the potential of downstreaming coal and looking at methanol and ethanol. When we reviewed it, we reviewed it originally 6 or 7 years ago, and then we revisited it last year. To us, the economics aren't really that attractive. And so far, we haven't really progressed down that route. A couple of other coal companies have committed to building those gasification plants or coal to methanol. But no one has actually started building it yet. So, or got one into production. I apologize if they have actually started building, but no one's really got it into production yet. So that's not really an area where we believe Bayan will proceed at the moment. It could change, but it's not really where we're going at the moment.
Right. And moving on, in Indonesia, we have this harga batu bara acuan, the HBA. So we know that this disparity between HBA and the selling price alongside high royalties is also considered to be a burden to some coal producers in Indonesia. What does Bayan see regarding this?
Look, the HBA is used for basically calculating your royalty. So if it's higher than the actual price that you can sell the coal, it's an additional burden on the company. Obviously, the government has worked closely with the Mining Association. They did revise the calculation methodology of the HBA recently, which has made it closer to market prices. So hopefully, collaboration between the Mining Association and the government can work further on refining that. But it is what it is.
Right.
And obviously, we comply with that. But inherently, it's a trailing index. So because you're using previous data to calculate what the government believes is the current price. So when prices are going down, you're always paying on higher.
Yeah.
The trade-off is when prices go up, you tend to be paying on the lower.
And still on the regulations that Indonesian government has, what's your thought about the domestic market obligation policy, the DMO?
Well, that's an integral part of the government's plan to ensure that there's adequate power within Indonesia. We fully support the government's DMO regulation, and the Tabang mine, which has 3 current concessions, are all compliant with DMO.
All compliance with the DMO.
Correct.
Do you think this could reduce the company's profitability in the midst of declining coal prices, this DMO obligation?
This year, yes, it definitely impacts our profitability because the sales price cap used to calculate your DMO price is capped at $70 Newcastle when the market price is 130 to 140. So it definitely impacts your profitability, yes, but it's an obligation that we take seriously and comply with to be allowed to continue to operate in Indonesia.
Right. And the other one, the newest regulation that will be implemented in the August 1st, 2023, is that all the export proceeds need to be placed in Indonesia for a minimum of 3 months, the 30% margin. Your thoughts about this, sir?
Look, I think we're quite lucky. We're generating healthy enough margins and have existing relationships with our banks that if we require to draw down additional working capital to cope for it, we'll be able to. For other producers, I think it will cause problems. If you're not generating 30% margins and you've got to tie up 30% of your export revenues, then it could cause cash flow problems, and it could eventually lead to some companies closing down. I think the association has started to raise some concerns about that, and so we'll await to see what happens with the dialogue between the Mining Association and the government.
But from Bayan, you are still considerably strong regarding this implementation policy.
We're lucky. We've got a large enough margin that we're not going to be adversely affected to a large extent. We have existing relationships with a number of Indonesian banks so that if we do need to get additional cash in to smooth our cash flow, we'll be able to do so under existing facilities.
But you see it as a quite challenge for other coal producers if they don't need a healthy margin for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't wish it on anyone, but I would predict some businesses will have some serious problems, yes.
Sure. Now moving on, sir, we have talked about the declining of global coal prices, the normalization of global coal prices compared to what we have last year. What are the other challenges that faced by coal entrepreneurs, coal miners in 2023, and looking forward to even more years ahead?
I think the world's view of coal miners is that we're a dirty industry, and therefore ESG, to try and differentiate ourselves from typical producers, is something that we try and focus in on. We try and behave responsibly and have a number of programs whereby We try and give back to the local communities and the wider population of Indonesia.
The ESG compliance, how do you strive to be still compliant for the ESG issues, especially in Indonesia, in coal mining practice or also CSR? What does Bayan do, sir?
Yeah, well, obviously the starting point is you have to comply with all the regulations, but we try and take it further than that. We've been independently certified on environmental management and quality control under the international standards. We have an umbrella foundation, Bayan Peduli, which takes the lead
Bayan
in
Peduli.
all of the charitable initiatives that we currently do. So there's a variety of programs under health, under education, under the environment and biodiversity, and also under sustainability that we are happy to fund.
How significant is Bayan Peduli and all the ESG implementation for Bayan also benefiting Bayan's performance going forward, sir? How do you see it as a Chief Financial Officer?
Look, we've always tried to work in partnership with people. We work in remote areas. We try and offer job opportunities, training. We try and improve the quality of life that they have through health, through education. So Bayan Peduli is an expansion of those programs that we were already doing and bringing them together under one umbrella. One of our recent initiatives is some scholarships that we've announced with 8 universities in Indonesia. Hopefully we'll get another couple of universities on to reach agreement with us shortly. But out of those 8, it's 320 students a year. So after 4 years, we're going to be providing scholarships for 1,200 students a year. So I think that will make a difference. We hope it makes a difference.
For sure.
And that's just one of the programs under Bayan Peduli.
And thank you so much for that commitment. And lastly, as you are the Chief Financial Officer for Bayan and also have been prominent coal industry players in Indonesia, how do you actually see the coal industries going forward in the upcoming years? How do you see the future of coal, sir?
Well, coal is undoubtedly a twilight industry. I think the main difference of opinion is when it's going to end.
When it's going to end?
I'm pretty optimistic that coal will still be around for quite a while.
How long is quite a while?
How long is quite a while? I don't see it disappearing any time before 30 years or even maybe progressively declining. But before it's totally stopped, I would guess it may well be as long as 40 years from now.
4 years from now.
Obviously, it will take up a smaller proportion of the energy mix. Renewable energy is rapidly expanding, rightly so, and it will continue to expand. But there's still the base load of power that will be required to be produced, especially in Asia, to power the growth of the Asian countries. And predominantly at the moment, that is coal. A number of the forecasters have still believe that peak burn in the world has not been achieved. So whilst there's growth in renewables, there is also growth in coal-fired power plants. These are brand new power plants that are getting built, and they have an effective life of 20 to 30 years.
20 to 30 years, and you said it earlier, 40 years. There's still a burning
I still think there's going to be more built. So it's not as though no new power plants will be built in the next 4 or 5 years. So I think it's going to be longer than 20 to 30 years.
Right. And lastly, we need your thoughts about the downstreaming policy in Indonesia. We know that President Joko Widodo's regulations to really aggressive on downstreaming policy for minerals has been very aggressive for these past years. How does Bayan generally see it? And regarding the specific downstreaming policy for coal itself, does this have a future for that?
Well, coal, unlike a number of other minerals in Indonesia, can't really be upgraded. It can't be concentrated. It's not as though you need to refine coal. So obviously there's the coal to gas or coal to methanol, which we have considered and would consider again. But in relation to the general policy, I think it's been obviously been beneficial for Indonesia. There's been a large amount of foreign investment into refineries for various commodities, which have benefited Indonesia. So the general policy, we fully understand and are supportive of. In relation to can we downstream coal, you can't downstream coal to a large extent, unfortunately.
Right. And any thoughts, any aspirations, or any hope for Indonesia's government in terms of making a regulation that will support even more the coal industry in Indonesia, sir? We know we had some regulation on DMO, the HPA, now about the export proceeds. What is your hope and aspirations from Bayan for the Indonesia's government in terms of creating a regulation that will have a sustainable impact on coal industry financially?
As a private company,
Yeah.
we would most likely prefer less regulations
All right.
in relation to running our business. However, for new regulations, just really speaking to the industry players in the formulation of those regulations, and then being long-term consistent regulations. The mining industry is a long-term business. We're building infrastructure for 3 years because we see a future for 10 or 15 years. So changes in regulations during those periods can cause considerable difficulty. So that's all I guess I would say in relation to regulations.
A stabilized and a long-term regulation is always
Correct.
favorable for that. Well, thank you so much. That will end our discussion for today. Thank you so much, Mr. Alastair, for having our time with us in CNBC Indonesia. A pleasure
My
and
pleasure.
an honor to
Thank
be
you
in
very
Mining
much.
Zone CNBC Indonesia. Dan diskusi dengan Chief Financial Officer Bayan Resources Alastair McLeod telah kita akhiri di Mining Zone CNBC Indonesia, Beyond Business.